Welcome back to another episode of The View from 32, the 1932 Criterion Theater podcast. Today we're honored to have Hawk Henries with us. Hawk is a musician and a professional flute maker. Enjoy. All right, welcome back to episode 11 of The View from 32, our 1932 Criterion Theater podcast. Today we have Hawk Henries with us. Hawk is a local flute maker. Hawk, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, of course you would ask that question. Where should I begin? I think since primarily, or at least one of the reasons why we're here is to talk about my flutes, I can tell you that I've been a flute maker for 30 years.
Okay.
Began building flutes by accident, if you will.
Okay.
My family, after a number of years, one of the secrets to living is learning how to whine when you want something. And for a number of years, I wanted very badly to play one of these kinds of flutes. And after a number of years of whining, my family, my wife and my dad, got tired of that whining, so they purchased my first flute, and I loved it. And about 2 months or so after they gifted it to me, I decided that I would improve the voice of it. And knowing nothing about it, how the flute operated, what I ended up doing was ruining it.
Yeah.
And, of course, that began some internal whining. And I kind of came to the conclusion that I knew they wouldn't give me another flute. So I had to repair the one that I had ruined. So literally, Taylor, what took 5 minutes to ruin took 6 months for me to figure out how to make it work again. And from that experience, the knowledge that I gathered from that, I applied to new materials and began building flutes with that.
Absolutely. Well, that's honestly the best way to learn, is to mess something up or fail a whole bunch of times, and then you realize, okay, now I know all the ways. I think it was at Benjamin Franklin. He kept failing on how to make a light bulb, and I think this is who it was. But then he was like, well, now I just know 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb.
Exactly.
And so it's it's true. That's the way it works so often. And no, that's so cool. So
I totally agree. I think that the key in all of that is perseverance, though. I always encourage people, whether it's with flutes or anything in life, really, if there's something that you really desire, something that you'd love to be able to do, then you do it. And when you're not successful at it the first time, try it a million more times.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
There's lots that you'll gather from that.
And I think that a lot of people try things, but then they give up, after they mess up 3 or 4 times, and they never really get to the place where you're at, where you're making all these beautiful instruments. I mean, they're pieces of art too. They're gorgeous. And
Thank you.
And so, but yeah, like you said, 6 months to fix one thing that you broke in 5 minutes. And so
Exactly.
it is. It's a lot of work, and it's obviously you have all these amazing instruments now that you've made. What is your kind of process from, or actually let me rephrase that. Where did you go from, you fixed this flute that you had broken, to saying, I want to make my own?
A great question. As soon as I realized, and it wasn't very long after I repaired the first flute, but as soon as I realized that I had the knowledge of how they worked, at least the rudimentary knowledge, I thought, I'll make new ones.
Yeah.
And of course, that is easier said than done. Even though you might have some concepts up in your mind about how things work, applying that to new materials was a little bit more difficult than just thinking about how it should work.
Totally. Well, you probably had to make a few that didn't work at all.
A few?
Yeah.
I made some flutes that had, here my flutes generally have 6 finger holes, but I've made some with like 12 and 14 finger holes. I'd put a hole in one place and then think, oh, that sounds nice, and then put another hole, and then realize they don't work well together. So I'd either plug it with a piece of wood or cork or what have you, and it became real clear to me that rather than continuing to make new bodies, I just have to figure out a way to repair my efforts, my new efforts, and learn from that.
Right.
So,
no, that's so cool. So how many flutes would you estimate that you made throughout your career of flute
frequently
making?
asked question. I have no idea.
Yep. I totally get that.
I don't keep any track of them.
Yeah.
I don't know. for the majority of my flute life, I've used just hand tools to make them. So I don't mass produce flutes. I can't make them as quick as most flute makers who use electric tools do. And a lot of folks today, they keep really great records of, their flutes, where they've gone, the numbers that they've made. And I've never, it's never been important to me.
Sure. Well, you're probably more of an artist and more of somebody that it's a passion of yours. And so it's not, maybe, like you said, it's not important. It's just something that you love to do. And so when you make a flute, is it, walk me through the process of, you find like a nice branch or a log in the woods that you're like, that's the one. Yeah. And you go from there, or?
Yeah. Well, typically, well, I'll preface this with my workshop now has tons of wood, and I very seldom have the need to to go searching in the woods for wood. I seldom buy wood, but I do get gifts of lumber and milled wood from woodworkers and other flute makers. And but earlier in my flute making time, I would do just as you described. I would go out into the woods. And primarily, I was looking for northern white cedar, but maple and sumac and other types of woods would be fine. I would look for a piece of wood that was standing, what some people would say, standing dead wood. Yep. And primarily because I'm impatient. Yeah. If I were to cut greenwood, I would have to wait for it to season, and that's on average a year for every inch of diameter. Right. So sometimes I'd go out into the woods and I'd look for 10 minutes. I'd find a piece of wood. My process has always been when I do take something, I leave something as well. So I leave a gift of something important to me, money if I have it, which I don't, but candy if I have that, but usually I've consumed it by the time I found the piece of wood, tobacco or something important. So that I can acknowledge, one, the gift of the tree, but also acknowledge the disruption of life that I've caused by taking that tree or that branch. There are many organisms that rely upon that standing dead wood for their lives, and I know I disrupt it. So I leave something to at least acknowledge and extend my gratitude.
I like that.
Yeah, thanks.
That's awesome. Thanks. So now I told you I might get a little bit nerdy into the woodworking side of it, because I'm really into it. So I know for guitars especially, the type of wood really affects the sound of the guitar. Is it the same with flutes?
Yes and no. I think the primary, I think the flute maker affects the voice of the flute more than the type of wood. Type of wood, let's just look at hardwoods and softwoods, generally speaking. Some flute makers will tell you that hardwoods give you a bright, crisp sound, and softwood a little bit more mellow. What I found over the years, and I think some other flute makers with a decent amount of experience, what we found is that the flute maker, as I mentioned, affects the voice, but the type of wood affects how the wood, the resonance of the voice. So the vibration that you might feel as a player, some sensitive listeners might hear, and there's not really a whole lot that you can do to change that resonance unless you coat your flute with many layers of a really hard finish, like a polyurethane or something. Then that dampens the resonance, but generally there's not much you can do. I use walnut oil as a finish on my flutes. Early in my time with the flutes, I tried different finishes, but they all said toxic. Some said toxic, period. Others said toxic until dry. Yeah. And I just didn't want to put something like that in my mouth. Totally. Yeah. I totally get that. So there's a varnish that I use a lot on tabletops that I do, because it's food grade. It's such a weird, and again, I'm sorry to get nerdy, but it's a food grade safe varnish. It also will withstand, and this is on the back of the can. It also is forklift traffic safe. So I don't know why, like a forklift can drive back and forth on it and it's not going to damage the finish. I don't know why you'd need to combine that with a food grade, but it's amazing. And I found it for tabletops, and it's called Rubio Monocoat. Rubio monocoat.
And so it's extremely hard and it's extremely safe because it's a food grade, but maybe something to look into because it's a really cool product that I've used.
Where do you find it?
I order it online.
Okay.
But it's really cool. It's a little can of it's like $70. It's really expensive, but it's a really great product. And again, you don't need to, with a lot of polyurethanes, it's like multiple coats to get it to where you want it. But it's a one coat, and it actually soaks in and bonds with the wood fibers to make it's beautiful.
I'll look into it. I'm learning. Go ahead.
I get so nerdy about this stuff.
No, that's cool.
I love it.
I'm learning about a flute that comes from West Africa. The Fulani people play it. It's called tambin or tambin, Tambin. And so I'm learning about making them as well. And one of the persons who I've been talking to about that said they use lacquer on the outside. And lacquer's okay. I've made a couple so far and put some lacquer on it, but I like the idea of the food safe finish.
Well,
so
exactly.
Look into that.
Exactly. So share with us what you got here. What can you talk about each one of these, or are they all a little bit different? I'm very ignorant about flutes in general, so I would love for you to share what you have here.
Yeah. So the flutes that I have in front of us here, they're of course different types of wood. This one is made from red flame box elder.
Okay.
That's the primary wood, and I kind of forgot what the accent woods are. I made this about 12 or 15 years ago.
Okay.
This is eastern red cedar, which is actually a juniper, as you well know, being a woodworker. This is a piece of black walnut, American black walnut. I love the story of this particular one, this walnut flute. It was a part of a pew in a church.
Oh, wow.
The church was in Norwich Walk in here in Maine, and it was about 300 years old when it was being deconstructed.
Yeah.
And the person who I didn't know at the time, he had gathered some of this walnut, and then we became friends, and he gave me a few pieces. And I love the idea of making a flute out of something that people prayed on for 300 years or so. So
that's so cool. Well, I love that too because it's got that piece of wood has so much history and all the things that a lot. Not to get too into it, but my wife and I we love to go explore old abandoned houses, like out in just old 200-year-old houses. And back in Tennessee, there was one that we went in, and it was so cool. And all the walls, we were talking like, if these walls, like all the things that these walls have seen, from the different families who had lived there. And so all those people that had sat on that pew and all the people that had, come across that, all the words that had been spoken in that building, and now you're speaking through it in a different way. Sure. It's really cool to think about that kind of stuff. I love it. I love it. I have an old hand planer that was, I dated it, with some of the features on it. It's from 1870. And every time I use it to make something, I love thinking about all the other things that that planer has made, and just, keeping it alive.
Yeah.
It's
the
so
hands
cool.
that used to use that planer. I get my tools from the tool barn.
Yeah,
You're familiar with the tool barn, right? And I've been using the same tools for 30 years, for the most part. Now I'm making a face and saying for the most part, because if you came into my shop now, you'd see some electric tools too. I'm learning about using them, but all of my hand tools come from the tool barn. Okay. And I just love the idea that there were woodworkers before me that used these same tools.
I love that.
I think that they're in some kind of sense guiding my hand when I'm using those tools as well.
I love that.
I blame them for the mistakes that I make. So
exactly. So what are the tools that you use to construct these mostly?
So to bore out the center of the flute, I'll describe in case there's someone who's not familiar with this kind of flute.
Sure.
The flute is divided into two chambers.
Okay.
So the first chamber begins at the mouthpiece. It's hollow all the way up to right about where this leather tie is. Right there, there's a solid wall of wood inside. And there's a hole on this side of the wall of wood. And then after that wall, there's the rest of the chamber. And there's a hole on that other side of the wall as well. I use a brace and a bit to bore out the center to make it hollow. I bore from both ends.
Okay.
And stop. I usually I leave about 1/8 of an inch between the two hollow sections. I use a draw knife and a block plane to do the shaping.
Yep.
Copious amounts of sanding.
Sanding is the worst.
But you know what?
You have to do it though.
You have to
if
do
you
it.
don't, yeah.
And I've learned to love it. I find it to be.
It can be relaxing if you
I've
make
fallen
it.
asleep doing
Yep.
it. To make all of the finger holes and the sound mechanism holes and the blowhole here, I use rat tail files.
Okay.
Around, they're tapered. I heat them in fire.
Okay.
Nowadays, I use a propane torch.
Yeah.
To make the pieces at the top, I use a carving knife.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. So really all by hand.
All by hand.
That's so cool.
It's my wife. Her name is Lisa. Years ago, when I used to bore, well, I still do, but she would have to hold the piece of wood for me, and I'd be boring it, and we'd be having a discussion. She'd be telling me that I wasn't boring it straight,
Right.
and I'd be telling her she wasn't holding it straight, and we'd go back and forth. And one day, her dad saw this, and he looked, and it was kind of funny, but I understood being a dad myself. He looked, and his eyes got big, and he just turned around and walked out the door.
Yep.
And about an hour and a half later, he came back with a Black & Decker workmate for me. He said,
Yep.
"You just put the wood in that, flip it over on the side, and it'll be fine."
Yep. Stick a level on it real quick and you're good to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think he was concerned about his daughter's health more than our arguing,
Yeah, I love it.
Me too.
And that's drilling a hole that long, trying to keep it straight. That's difficult.
Well, I've been doing it for 30 years, so not so much anymore.
Yeah.
But early in my time, it was difficult. And, sometimes I'd start with a piece of wood that might be that big,
Sure.
and then I'd end up with a flute that was that thick,
Right.
just because I wasn't sure.
Right.
And, of course, there were those times where I might bore out the side.
Yeah.
But, again, I'm using literally the same tools, and I know them quite well.
Sure.
They're not precise, so they wobble a little bit, and I know the wobble.
Right.
Yeah. So
You get used to all your stuff.
Absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
that. This might be kind of an odd question. Is there one that is your favorite?
Not an odd question at all, and I would say absolutely yes.
Okay.
And that one would be the one that I'm playing at the moment.
Right.
So, I mean, each,
Yep.
I have a bag full. I only brought a few with me today. They're all unique.
Absolutely.
They all have a different kind of voice to them, a different feel, because they're made from different woods, and other things contribute to how they feel when you're playing them. It's like did I mention candy before?
Yes.
I like bridge mix.
Okay.
And bridge mix is loaded with all different kinds of, good chocolate covered things,
Yeah.
raisins and nuts and stuff. And each piece that I take, I like.
Right.
So it's the same with the flutes.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
No, that's so cool.
How long have you been a woodworker?
Oh, man. Probably 10 years now.
And
I
how
would say.
did you get involved with that?
That's a good question. So like I said, we used to live in the Nashville, Tennessee area, and I made my wife a Tennessee sign out of I took an old pallet and I ripped it apart and took all the old pallet wood. And this was 10 years ago, and that was cool. And I made basically a square with it, and then projected the state of Tennessee on it, traced it, cut it out with a jigsaw, sanded it all down, put a little star over where we lived, and varnished it, and gave it to her as a gift. And she really liked it, and posted a picture on social media and said, "Oh, my husband made this for me." And a couple of her friends were like, "Oh my gosh, would you make one of this state that I live in, this state?" And I was like, "I guess." And so I made some for them, and and then all these people were like, "Oh my gosh, I want one of this and this and this and this and this." And I was like, "Oh goodness gracious!" And so I made a social media of it and started making. I probably made 200 of them.
Oh wow!
It just happened randomly, kind of like you making flutes. It was just a kind of a fluke. And so I started doing that, and then I started getting more into, I got commissioned to build 100 picture frames for these posters for an event that a buddy of mine was doing. And I didn't realize how many frames 100 frames was. When I started, that was a lot. It was a lot. And about halfway through it, I was like, this was a huge mistake, because it was a ton of work. But it was really fun, and I learned a lot, and that was the first thing that taught me about, production work and doing, instead of making a frame, then making another frame, then making another frame. I was like, well, how about if I set up stop blocks and cut everything at the same? And so I learned a lot there. And like you said, you go through and you fail enough to where you learn how to do it the right way. And yeah, since then I've made, cabinets and furniture and huge conference tables and a ton of really, really great things. And we, redone homes and done all this crazy stuff that I never thought I would do.
Yeah.
But now it's a passion of mine. I love it. And it's one of the things that, you have a long day or you're stressed out about something. Building something.
Go to the shop.
Yeah. I absolutely love it.
I so understand that. I actually, I never had the idea of making flutes for other people. Never thought about selling flutes. I just wanted to make them. And when I began making, I made them for me. But when other people expressed interest, I just gave them away.
Right.
And I still give a fair amount of them away. And there was a gallery in Blue Hill, and someone was having an art opening, and they asked me to come and play for them.
Sure.
I said, yeah, sure. And I had a few flutes, and whenever I went someplace, I brought flutes with me in case I could either give it away or. Well, the gallery owner, she saw some of my flutes, and she said, well, I'd like to carry some of these in the gallery. Are they for sale? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
And I told her what the price was, and she immediately cocked her head and closed one eye, and she said, well, that creates a dilemma for me. And I'm assuming, I assumed that my price was too expensive, and I think I was asking like $80 or something, and she looked and she said, I could get $400 to $600 for these easily. Right. So would you take this much money? She offered me $300, and I just looked. I smiled and I said no. I said what I want is the $80. I think it was $80.
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable with that, then I am. But if you're uncomfortable with that, then I'll just keep my flutes and you can do something else.
Right.
I mean, I didn't say it quite that way.
Right. No, I totally get it.
Because then, as I still do today, I had such a conflict with exchanging money, for this work. I've been doing it full time now, both as a maker and a player for 25 years, and that conflict hasn't really lessened.
Yeah.
It's still there. I think it's a little bit easier for me to accept money for either my flutes or for doing concerts and things like that. But I still would much rather do it with no money exchanged. But it's as I mentioned, I've been doing it full time for 25 years, so it's how I support my family and pay bills and stuff. So that's the medium of exchange nowadays. I'd be happy with gold.
Yeah. I love it. No, that's so cool. I love that, and I think it's super unique story and career to be in. What are some of do you have any sort of influences that made you want to get into playing the flute or making flutes or?
Yes, and but before I speak to them, 30 years ago when I began making flutes, it was fairly unique.
Absolutely.
Of course, this kind of flute, typically called Native American flutes. I hesitate. I make faces when I use that term for a couple of reasons, but the primary one is that Native American is kind of a misnomer, and as you well know, there are well over 600 nations of indigenous people on this continent, different cultures, and each having a name for themselves.
And many here in Maine too, which is really cool.
Wabanaki communities, absolutely.
I love it.
And I'm Nipmuc.
Okay.
I think categorizing the flute or anything like related to indigenous people with this broad term does a disservice because it doesn't allow people to know the individual nature of the various cultures here.
Sure.
It lumps us all together. It also implies that we're the first Americans. Hope you're catching this face. Because, of course, America's a relatively new concept.
Absolutely.
And we've been here much longer than that. So I used to sing on a drum, sing songs for people to dance to, and ceremonial songs and things like that. Of course, I listened to a lot of native music, and I listened to flute for quite a while. And kind of jumping back a little bit, as a child, I tried to play music. I tried the saxophone and tried the keyboards. Didn't have any success with that. I gave up when I was about 10. And just kind of felt like I had no musical ability. Then after, listening to this flute for a while and deciding that I wanted to learn how to play one, I think it was just listening to all of the flute players, and there weren't many, but they were the inspiration.
Yeah.
They were what motivated me to at least make the effort to play.
Definitely.
If that did I
Oh
speak
yeah,
to your question?
absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Are you self-taught, or did you have somebody that, a mentor or something?
No mentor. Self-taught, and I'll make another face when I say that, because I'm really of the opinion that like we were talking about with our tools before, the old hand tools, that those people who used the tools before that in some kind of way, influence what we do. And I think that with music, it's the same way. Certainly, I listen to a lot of, not a lot, I listened to flute music. Again, there wasn't a whole lot then, and influenced by what I heard. But I'm also inspired, and my music is informed by what I hear outside.
Yep, absolutely.
Nature, as some people would call it.
Yep.
And at the time, there weren't books. Social media was basically non-existent. There weren't videos and places to learn. So I would just spend as much time with the flute. My very first flute was with me everywhere I went.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
In my home, it would go from one room to the next. If I was in my car, it would be in the car with me, and I picked it up sometimes for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, sometimes for hours.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my skills for playing came from, I
Gotcha.
guess.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And one of my favorite, he's more of a modern composer. His name's Tony Anderson. He does a lot of like film scores and stuff. But he, in an interview, he said that he's like, I think that all the music we'll ever make is already inside of you. And so it's either a matter of, because he's like, I don't have any lessons either. I just, it's a matter of learning how to make that music, kind of come out of you. Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening to other people and getting influenced that way, or having somebody teach you, quote unquote, teach you how to play, to where, but with some people, I mean, I do think that there are people who you could teach them all day long and they'll never get it, because it's just like, that's not my thing. I don't have that, to give. I don't have that part of me. But then I think there's other people who do have it that have never tried, and they, like you said, with the keyboard and the saxophone, it's just like, eh. But then with the flute, it's just like this whole new, this whole new thing, and this whole new feeling, and this whole new skill that you might not even know that was there until you tried. And it's really cool too, because I've tried other instruments too, and not for me.
Yeah.
But there's something about the guitar. I love playing the guitar, and it's I've never really had a quote unquote lesson, but I've had a lot of you listen to songs over and over and over and over and over and learn how to play them, and I think that's kind of like a lesson in itself.
Oh, sure.
Just
sure.
Like you spoke to.
Anything that can be anything that sparks that what you were describing.
Yeah, and that's
I'll
a great
describe
word to
as
use
a
it.
memory or that musical knowledge that lives within you. Anything that sparks it, I think, is wonderful. Whether it's just listening to someone else's music or reading it in a book. I don't know how to read music or anything like that.
Same.
Or having someone teach you. You might learn some songs by rote, but then one day all of a sudden something kicks in, and that you're just like you're doing something incredible. And I went to talk with some ethnomusicology students at Berkeley, and after I was done with the classes, I was at that point in my life I had been thinking about learning music formally and going to school for it. And the professor he looked at me, he said, no, don't do that. He said, because then you'll unlearn music. And I had to really think about that.
Yeah.
What does that mean, you know? And I mean, I'm not convinced that I know now. I've had other musicians, you know, formerly trained musicians say the same thing, that I wished I had learned to play like you play music before I learned formally.
Well, I feel like it's more of a feeling and an emotion coming out instead of math. Like, because when you're reading music, it's almost a mathematical thing where it's just
Sure.
like this all goes together in this certain equation.
Sure.
And there it is. That's the song.
Yeah.
But with you know, not having formal training, you do feel it more, and you're more. I don't know how to describe it. It's a weird kind of thing.
It's tough
yeah.
to describe. I agree with you, and yet at the same time, I don't agree with you. And,
Yeah.
and here's why. When I listen to Bach, I like Baroque music and early music. He was a mathematician.
Oh, super.
But the stuff that he wrote, and I'm sure he heard in his head before he even put it to paper, was, I mean, it was magic.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and he felt that. I would love to be in his head for a while, because I'm sure as he was writing, however he wrote his, you know, musical notation down, he had to have been feeling.
Oh, absolutely.
What was coming out of
Absolutely.
You know, out of those mathematical notations. And recently, I was having a discussion with someone about flute making, and I belong to a flute making forum on social media, and I'm, you know, because I'm doing it with hand tools, I'm kind of the odd person in the group, because everyone's using
a
high-tech
lathe and all this stuff.
lathes and computer
CNC type stuff.
CNC type machines, you know, all kinds of really high tech printers.
Yeah.
I'm using 3D printers to make flutes.
Yeah.
And you know, I always suggest to people, why don't you just get a knife? And so, you know, I was kind of commiserating the fact that I'm, you know, one of the oddballs in the group, but doing it publicly and suggesting that there's beauty in this old way of doing flutes,
100%.
as there is in the mathematical way. And
Both take skill for sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
one
absolutely.
of the guys in the group, you know, he commented and he said, you know, I completely understand where you're coming from. He said, but I'm a physicist, and I use math to articulate the beauty that I see in the world, whereas you might use words or music, or I do photography as well.
Okay, nice,
You
yeah.
might use your camera. He said, I use math to articulate the beauty that I see and feel in the world, and that hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah.
I was
Oh,
just like
absolutely.
blown away by, you know, that little simple statement.
No, I totally get that. I was a mechanical engineering major for 3 years in school, and I love math and I love physics, and my brain thinks like that. But at the same time, I like 2.5 years in, I was like, I don't think this is what I want to do. Because I felt, you know, more of a. I ended up doing studio music production because I just liked the creative side of that more. But also, I hear people all the time. They're like, "Oh, I'm not creative," and it's like,
Right.
yes, you are.
Of course.
Everyone's creative. And it was specifically, it was an early childhood education major. And I was like, yes, you are. If you can come up with a way to help children understand how to learn,
Exactly.
that's incredibly creative. It's just a
Exactly.
different kind of creativity.
Yeah.
But even like the physicist who is doing all that stuff on a CNC, that's super creative.
Absolutely.
He might not think it's creative, but it's super creative. And I think
Absolutely.
everybody has creativity in them.
Yeah.
It just might come out in different ways.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's so cool. So moving on, do you have anywhere that people can find you? Do you have a website or a place where somebody can look up, you know, your flutes, or where you're going to be playing, or book you to do something?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It's
Okay.
just my name, hawkhenries.com.
Okay.
I think that's how you'd find it.
Great.
And then I also have a page on Facebook.
Okay.
Kind of, I have two, but the business-related one, where I don't put anything on there whatsoever,
Sure.
except a photograph every now and then.
Okay.
But those places, you know, my wife kind of encourages me to, particularly with the Facebook page, to kind of list where I'm playing and,
Sure, yeah.
you know, if I have flutes for sale, which I do, things like that. My website has it's quite a lot of reading, and it's
Okay.
more about the kinds of work that I do.
Sure.
With flutes and music related, but you know, a lot of what I do, even though the flute, appears to be a central part of it, really it isn't. It's just a ticket in the door to
Sure.
allow me to do the things that I think are important. So,
Sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's cool. Now, do you have any advice to somebody that may be interested in doing what you do, or a woodworker, or a upcoming musician, or somebody that wants to get into the arts?
From the part of our discussion just a few moments ago, I would say, yes, make a lot of mistakes. Find whatever it might be. But let's say we're thinking just about flutes, and my bias is going to leak here. In the flute world today, the vast majority of flute makers are not native people. One, and even greater majority of the flute makers, including some native people, are incorporating kind of a European idea of music in the flute to their flute making. So what I mean by that is they're making flutes with very specific keys and concert pitch, concert tunes, things like that. And one of the things that I've observed over the number of years of folks approaching, particularly when they're new, is that it's really frustrating for them because that's a different kind of precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Than making flutes the way that historically they were made and traditionally they continue to be made by a few of us. It's a different type of precision, and what I'm seeing and reading and hearing is that when folks aren't successful with that, they oftentimes just throw away or burn their instruments. I like to encourage people, if that's their desire, if they want to make a flute that's in tune with an orchestra or a guitar or something, that's fine, but learn the rudiments first.
Sure.
Learn how the flute operates. Learn what happens if you have a flute that's this long versus this long, and what size bore you need to make a flute that big work or a flute that small work. Learn about the relationships between the bore diameter and the finger holes and all of the mechanisms that make the flute work. And once you have a foundation of knowledge for building a flute, then you can fine-tune that, and you can work with concert pitches and keys and things of that nature, or more traditional kinds of voicings of the flute. But I think the same goes for with anything, even with regards to playing. Oftentimes people are like me, listening to flute music, and then finding themselves, just kind of fed up with the fact that they can't replicate it. That was a problem for me in my early years. I, was listening to various flute players, and then would try to mimic what I heard.
Right.
And I would get frustrated. I learned later part of that reason was because my flute wasn't tuned like theirs. But my wife one day said to me, she said, "Why don't you stop trying to play other people's music and play your own music?" And I looked at her like she was speaking, some foreign alien language. I said, "I don't have any music." And she said, "Of course you do. Just stop listening to flute music." So I did. And I literally stopped listening to flute music probably, I think I started listening to this kind of flute music again last year.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mentioned I like Baroque music, I like reggae music and West African music, all kinds of musics, but I stopped listening to this flute music. I'm pretty sure it was just last year I started listening again.
Okay.
So
But your own style probably emerged from that, from you stopping listening.
I think my own style emerged from a couple of key places. One is just this broad thing that we call music, and wherever that might be, other musicians, the sound of wind and birds and whales, things of that nature, and my desire to use music to articulate how I feel. So for me, music is prayer, and this may be a clever way of saying that. Well, I'll just say it this way: when one is engaged in something prayerful, there's nothing wrong. There cannot be something wrong. So if I'm playing, playing a song, and some kind of note happens or some kind of sequence happens that I didn't intend, it becomes part of the mix. It's part of the prayer. And
Absolutely.
I think in general, prayers are, for me, effective when they're not rote.
Yeah, and they don't have to be perfect.
They are perfect in and of themselves, however
Exactly.
imperfect
Exactly.
they might appear to be. Yeah, they're living. I might play a song here and then go down the road and play it again, and down the road or what's happening here informs the nature of that group of notes. So I might extend it, I might change a little melody part of it or whatever it's called, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
But, yeah.
No, that's awesome, and that's good advice. And I've really enjoyed talking with you. This has been really great.
Thank you.
I did have another question too that I just remembered. Do you teach flute making at all? Do you have any like interns or any sort of classes that you do?
I've done numerous classes over the years. I've taught people from as young as 3.5 years old.
Okay.
To
Awesome.
I think the oldest person I think she was maybe 87 or 88.
Okay.
She continues to be a flute maker today.
That's awesome.
And all ages in between. Anyone who's interested in the flute, and I may not have said this. Sometimes I have conflict with the idea of European ideas of music being used with the flute, and the whole. And you should stop me if we're running out of time.
No, we're good.
There's a lot of concern about cultural appropriation.
Right.
That, of course, could be an extensive discussion that we could have for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But my desire, one, is to encourage people to be creative, to explore that creative art part of who they are, is to encourage people to learn about the history, traditional uses of this flute, and to carry that knowledge forward with them into however it is that they use
Absolutely.
it. Whether they use it in concert with orchestras or by itself or however they use it. So, my hope is that even if you don't desire to build a flute exactly the way that I do with the same kind of thinking, you'll at least have some understanding of it.
Definitely. Well, and just to be able to pass along your incredible skill set and your knowledge to future generations of people that are interested in it. It's a really cool thing to do. And I was just curious if you did that, because that's really cool.
Yeah, no, I
Can people find out more info on your website if they want to, maybe message you about learning more about that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Website, Facebook.
Great.
Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, Hawk, thank you so much for chatting with us for a bit. We'll dip out for a second, hear you play some of your music on the flutes that you've made. So
sounds great.
This has been really fun.
Taylor,
I enjoyed it
wonderful.
a lot, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for sharing this time with me, and I'm happy. Chuck's behind the scenes, but I'm happy he's here and
Me too.
a part of it. And I absolutely love this theater, the Criterion. And for folks who don't know about it, they really should look you up online and see the incredible things that go on here.
It's a beautiful place, and
really is.
we're looking forward to the future when we can get back to some semblance of
That'll
normal.
happen soon, I'm sure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, Hawk, thank you. We'll hear you play in just a minute.
Sounds great, Taylor. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome. This first song that I'll play is a song called Thanksgiving. One of my really old ones, and one that I find really to be helpful, daily. The song is simply about remembering that each day that we have in our lives, no matter the difficulties and hardships that we might face, that our lives are, there are many reasons to be thankful. And, in particular, during these difficult times that we're all dealing with today, I'm of the opinion that if we step outside and take a look at the birds and the flowers and give a listen to the wind, just allow this thing that we call nature to wash over us, it helps to lessen some of the burdens and the difficulties. And for that, I'm grateful. So, Thanksgiving. Some years ago, I was thinking about the conflicts between native people and people from across the ocean. And as we know, the history of relationship has been a strained history, a strained relationship. So I wanted to make a song that helped me to remember that the peoples from Europe have a very similar history to indigenous people here, similar cultures if we look far enough back. And in part, the purpose of the song was to remind me of our similarities, of the commonalities that we share. And my hope when playing this song is that we can look at each other and no matter what language we speak, no matter what color our skin might be, no matter what our religion or our ideologies might be, things that oftentimes create conflict between peoples, that we'll be able to see ourselves in each other and consequently offer respect and compassion and love to each other. So this song, Old Song. So a lot of my time when I'm not home being a husband and a dad, or in the shop being a flute maker, a lot of my time is spent outside. Ever since I was a child, I was infatuated with, in love with the other beings that live on this earth. Everything from the tiniest of insects to the biggest of whales, blue whales, and trees and flowers and all manner of things. And I search for words at times to express how much I love this earth and the things that live on this earth with us. and sometimes make the effort to try to find things to say that encourages and maybe convinces other people to go out and explore and feel the beauty of this earth. Here's a song that's simply about my love for the earth. Early in my time as a flute maker and flute player, even before so, one of the persons whose music I listened to quite a bit and who I really loved, his name is John Rayner. John Rayner was from Taos Pueblo, and John was a flute maker. He came from a family that they were responsible for singing ceremonial songs for the community, and John felt as a youngster that his voice was inadequate for following what his family had done. So John learned about the flute and began making and playing flute. And his way with the flute was really unique in the flute world, at least to my ears it was. And what I learned later in life was that some of the music that John played was inspired and informed by both his family community at Taos Pueblo, but also the Church of Latter-day Saints. I believe that's the correct terminology that John belonged to. And some of the musics that he played on the flute, where he blended both the traditional music from his culture and then the traditional ceremonial religious music from his religion, to me were really spectacular and evocative, and helped me to be mindful of the fact that our differences can either cause us to be at war with each other or create incredible beauty. So John and I became friends towards the end of his life, and I remained friends with his parts of his family, his brother and his sister-in-law. And so I'd like to play a song from Taos Pueblo, both as a way of honoring John and his contribution to the flute world, but also his contribution to the world of peace. So this next song, my wife would be upset if I didn't play this. She's out in the audience listening. Actually, there's no one out there. But this next song is called Earth and Sky. And Earth and Sky is simply about the relationship between the feminine and the masculine. And those energies exist in all of us, and from how I see the world, in all of creation. And it boggles my mind that in some way, shape, or form, we've forgotten the importance of the women in our communities, in our homes, in our cultures. And at least for me, this is a way to remember that without my mother, I couldn't be. And without my father, I couldn't be. So a way to honor the existence of both of those energies within each of us. Earlier, I was talking with Taylor, and I was mentioning how it's been quite a long time since I've really listened to any flute music. And the music that I've listened to in the last year included music from Kiowa Comanche flute player Tommy Ware, whose music I used to listen to even before I began playing and making flutes. And one song that kind of stands out that I'd like to make the effort to play from Tommy's is a courting song. And, there's a lot of stories. I guess I don't have time to really talk about the stories regarding the use of the flute, but one of those stories centers around the instrument being used as a courting tool. And in some discussions with some old flute makers, they kind of corroborated that story, but kind of added that, such as they added that the real thinking about it, according to them, was that, as with the last song that I just played, it was about honoring that feminine and masculine energy. So anyway, here's my effort to play one of Tommy Ware's courting songs. If this flute works, or if I work, this next song is about remembering the elders in our community, sitting with them, listening to their stories, gathering the knowledge that they're eager to share, and seeing the elders in the many forms that they exist in. Of course, the two-legged elders, which are all around us. Then there's the old tree and the old stone, maybe the songs from humpback whales. Some of those songs are hundreds and hundreds of years old, like many, many generations. And I was going to say I'm of the opinion, but it's not an opinion. Those old humpback whale songs contain knowledge from previous generations to instruct the young generations, the new whales, in certain aspects of how they move through the water and where they go and so forth and so on. Just as the knowledge from our two-legged ancestors can help us move through this life in a particular kind of way. So a song for the elders. So this last song that I'll play is a song that kind of, in a sense, comes from my childhood days. When I was very young and would do things that would get me in trouble, I would oftentimes get grounded. I would have to stay in the yard and hang out there, and friends couldn't come in the yard and play. We were fortunate to live in a place where we had several different apple trees and pear trees. And I would go sit in one of those trees and kind of commiserate the fact that, my parents were so mean and wouldn't allow me to go out and play with my friends. And usually when I got up in the tree, the whatever flying bugs were there, they would fly away, and whatever birds might have been hanging out, they would fly away as well. But it seemed after a while, the birds kind of got comfortable with my presence. I was there quite a bit. Well, more than I like to be anyway. And so at that point, may have been about 8 or 9, I started really watching the birds and paying attention, to how they moved and what they sounded like and what they ate and things of that nature. And I developed a love for them. And to this day, I'm an avid lover of birds, a bird watcher, some people would say, but I just love the fact that they're there. And here's a song about them. And cut. Now I'd like to do some stand-up comedy.
Airline food.
Yeah.